So, very warm welcome to this seminar, Effects on Corona, Hunger and Vulnerable Food Systems. This is a seminar in collaboration with Afrikagrupperna, Latinamerikagrupperna, Nordbruk and ABF Stockholm. It's a lunch seminar, so we're going to have a talk around 1 hour. And we're going to start with this panel that we have here for around 20-25 minutes, and then we open up for questions from the audience. But if you have any questions now, just feel free to add comments and questions. And if there's anything that is unclear, please write to us also so we can clarify. But with that said, I would like to start to introduce the panel that we have with us today. And we have Gloria Yimaga, who is the policy advisor for Afrikagrupperna. And then we have Marlene Sosa Mercado, who's a program officer for Latin America Group, so Latinamerikagrupperna. And then we have Eva Jonsson, who's a board member for Nordbruk, which is the Swedish part of La Via Campesina. And I would like us to start just to talk a bit about the work that you are doing, just to introduce brief introduction of the organizations and the work that you're doing. Eva, would you like to start?
Yes. Nordbruk is a member of the big organization La Via Campesina, and that is an organization for small-scale farmers, peasants, and the people working in the green area. And it has 200 members all over the world. The food system we have today is consuming nature and consuming people, and causing environmental damage and climate change. And every year we lose possibilities for the future. So for me it's very important to work in Nordbruk. And the loss of amount of farmers in Sweden is decreasing every year, and less land is used for food production, and that is very strange because we have good conditions in Sweden. We need farmers to get more sustainable future. Nordbruk worked together with the European Via Campesina organization, ECVC, to put forward the small-scale farmers' opinions and perspectives in the European Union. Nordbruk is representing ECVC in the Civil Dialogue Group for Forestry and Seeds, and EU is trying to get more power over forests in the whole of Europe. And Nordbruk see that the Swedish self-determination over forest is forest management as a very important question for the whole agriculture system, because most of the farmers are also forest owners, and also for the Sami people in the Nordic countries. That is also very important. And we have, if you don't know, Norway is not a member of European Union, but Finland is. And Nordbruk, together with ECVC, works with land issues, so land can be available for food producers in the whole of Europe. And the liberal policies and the EU constitution make it difficult for new farmers to get access to land, because the prices are rising all the time. And more land is owned by people that are not living in the area, but the land is situated. Nordbruk works for food sovereignty and human rights, and that is connected to natural resources, water and land, by writing debate articles, trying to organize more farmers, and to debate and participate in the discussion.
And how many members do you have?
About 100.
100 members, Great, thank you. Let's move to Latin America and Latin America groups. How are you working?
Yes, we work with social movements in Latin America then, mainly smallholder farmers and indigenous people, and with focus on youth and women. And well, we are part of the same struggle that tries to change the power structures to have a more just and sustainable society or societies. And we work with the Latin American referent of La Via Campesina, CLOC, and with other indigenous organizations like Huaquipqueji in Guatemala, Bartolina Sisa in Bolivia, and Pueblo Cayambe in Ecuador. And we support their leadership school in political education, human rights, democracy, and also agroecological schools. And it's also because we believe that hunger, there is hunger in the world. It's not because there is a lack of food. It's because of an equal distribution of resources and power. And well, these organizations, they work with different proposals of buen vivir, or the good living. That is like a concept that comes from the indigenous people, their way of looking at the world and conceive the world, and also about the human relations with nature that we're seen as one. And this is also highly connected to the other proposals that La Via Campesina has of food sovereignty and agroecology, that also talks about taking care, preservation of biodiversity and land and so. And we have chosen to work with these communities and these organizations because well, most of the poor people are found in the rural areas, and but they're the ones that feed us also, the majority of the people now. But their territories, as we have heard, like Eva talk about also, is that they're under threat. The territories, their livelihoods, and their lives also, because of the expansion of the agro-industrial, the industrial agriculture, and it also makes that they have to leave their territories, and often violently, and with forced evictions, and also sometimes with murders. And so here in Sweden we work also to raise awareness about these issues and the links between human rights violations in Latin America and environmental degradation there, and the links to Swedish politics and European politics and Swedish investments, like the Swedish
like
pension
Swedish
funds,
companies, and pension fund,
pension funds in farmland in Brazil, for example. So that's shortly.
Yeah, thanks. Good summary. And let's move to Gloria and Southern Africa.
Yes. So I, as you mentioned, I work for Africa Groupena. And Africa Groupena is a solidarity organization that works towards a just society, and we support and are in partnership with more than 30 organizations in sub-Saharan Africa, and mainly in Namibia, South Africa, Mozambique, Angola, and Zimbabwe. So we focus mainly on 3 thematic areas, and it's really good that what everybody mentioned is more or less what we work with. We work with issues of food sovereignty, we work with issues of SHR, also working and living conditions. So basically trying to see what is the main causes of inequalities in societies, and how can we together contribute. And within Sweden, what we do is similar to what you said. It's more on advocacy and lobbying, trying to change different Swedish policies that have effects beyond the borders, because we are in a global perspective where we are dependent on one another, even though sometimes we don't realize that. So we also work with campaigns on the quest of having a seed right, campaigns on wine campaign, like promoting towards equality of working conditions, and different other projects. We also have members here in Sweden, and currently we have more than 2,700 members, and they form local groups in different regions, and currently it's 10. So that is a little bit of a nutshell. And personally, I am very interested in land issues, and I've been working on it for 8 years. And I think what is mostly interesting is that when it comes to ownership and territories, it goes beyond just owning, because it also identifies towards our identity, whether you are a farmer or a pastorist. So that is really interesting to see the interconnection of all that. Yes.
Thank you all. I think it gave a good base and ground, and also what you are doing, and also that you are representing also a lot of organizations from both Latin America, Southern Africa and Europe. And this seminar is focusing on the effects of Corona. And in the light of the COVID-19, we can see that it has given a lot of effects on small-scale farmers around the world. And in mid-April, we all of you wrote a joint debate article that was published on Aftonbladet, highlighting some of the effects that Corona is affecting farmers around the world, and also the global food system. I just would like to ask you if you can elaborate on what effects you see from the different perspective and the partners that you are working with. Gloria, would you like to start to give a view from Southern Africa and the partners that Afrikagruppen is working together with?
Yes, definitely. I would just like to acknowledge that we wrote the debate article part of the network, Makten over Makten, and it's not just the three of us in the organizations, but we also have other organizations, and I think you could see in the link if you would like to read more. But what we did in that debate article is try to show that we have a vulnerable food system already, even before the Corona crisis. And what the Corona pandemic has shown, it alleviated towards that crisis and show that there is inequality in our communities. And already there is 821 million people who suffer malnutrition and hunger. And recently, from the report of the World Food Programme, they estimated that because of the Corona crisis, there can be an increase of more than 130 million people that will be affected, that will be added towards that amount of people facing malnutrition or hunger. And this is just because of the economic fallout of the COVID-19. And all this, the Corona pandemic has brought towards a lot of restriction for small producers in terms of mobility, panic, but also the lack of safe nets for most of the small-scale farmers during the pandemic. And of course, one can argue it's really important that we keep a distance, we adhere to the health suggestion, but it's also a privilege to actually to be able to have that and to be able to keep distance. And not every one can actually do that, even if they would want to. So that has also raised the issues in our partners in Sub-Saharan Africa, talking about that they had to choose, farmers and small producers had to choose between feeding their family or protecting against Corona. So we could see that it's also a power relation and dynamic in the world we live. Despite the effects that we face in Corona, most of the people who are producing our food that we consume today are the ones who are pushed aside. And I think we could go into more details on that, but just that overview. And also within the debate article, what we tried to do is to show the different effects and the vulnerability that Corona has showed in our food system that is controlled in a commodification of the food, which is more should be a human right, but instead it's more treated as a commodity with regardless of who is producing the food. So I'm sure I would just stop there for now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's move to Sweden and to Europe. What are the effects that we can see?
Yeah, I mean, there is no such big problems as in other countries, but it has awakened people, I think, Corona, because we don't have these big stores we had in the 80s for food and fuels.
You mean in Sweden?
In Sweden, yes. Finland still has it. They can store food for crisis situations. But Sweden are dependent on the delivery of food in the whole country, and that means that I feel that people feel insecure because they know we don't have the storage yet now, and then they go and empty the shelves in the supermarkets. So and one thing is also that we are so dependent on migrant workers. About 5,000 to 7,000 people every year come here to work at farms and also in the forest to plant trees and to pick berries in the big forests. That is much people doing that. Because why is it like that? That is because there is so much income in this work. That's why people don't want the work. So,
so how is the situation now for this summer?
I think it will be less vegetables and berries in the supermarkets and in the marketplaces, and it will be
So it means that we will even be more dependent on products from other countries coming to Sweden.
Yes. We will not starve, but
no.
anyway. But to change, I think it's not good that we are so dependent on other people, because we need to have people in this country that knows about how to pick the berries, how to pick the fruits, how to grow the vegetables, how to plant the trees. I know this, but the younger people doesn't know it. So I think my suggestion is that we try to get young people and students to work in the green area. So maybe with community supported work.
Now for this summer or for
the future?
Yeah,
because this is not sustainable.
No. I think we will come back also a bit more to the food system in Sweden and later on. But we can move to Latin America. How the effects there? What can you say?
Well, it's been a lot like what Gloria has been telling before, and just to highlight that what the pandemic has done is that it has aggravated the already existing inequalities that were there before, and the vulnerable food system that we have, and this is because of the effects of a market-driven capitalist system also, and that puts profit before human rights and nature's rights. So for example, we have our organizations there and smallholder farmers that haven't been able to sell their products in the local markets because they have been shut down, and so they have food in the field that is rotting, but you have also people that are hungry in the cities, so this is a big contradiction, and also measures from the government have more benefited big supermarkets and the agribusiness, the not smallholder farmers and their production and commercialization. And one other thing that we are seeing is that also the criminalization of social leaders and murdering of social leaders that defend their territory, amongst other in Colombia, because with the quarantine it was easier for hitmen to localize their victims.
So you can see an increase.
An increase, yeah. Our partner organizations there are talking about an increase in the killings and murderings of social leaders.
That's terrible.
Yes, it's really bad. Situation is critical, and it was even that before the COVID, the pandemic, but now it's even worse. And but also just to show like how our organizations have been organized to combat the crisis. They have develop different strategies in the rural areas and also proposals. So in Ecuador, for example, our partner organization of the Pueblo Cayambe, they have organized these baskets of agroecological food that they deliver to the capital. And this is also, as you mentioned a bit, like raise the awareness of the people in different sectors, and they have also had because of the more direct contact between consumer and producers. And in Brazil also we have the movement of small-scale women farmers that have a campaign of seeds of resistance, peace and sowing hope, weaving transformation. And well, I think you're gonna put the link on the so people can check it out. And they are actually delivering kits to vulnerable communities with medicinal herbs, as we call it, medicinal herbs and agroecological food. And well, it is also demonstrating like the capacity of the social organization in the territories. And I also like to mention that the movement of the landless workers in Brazil, they have launched an emergency plan for an agrarian reform in defense of life of Brazilian people, where they point out how you can create jobs, how you're supposed to democratize land, and so people can produce also food, and so everybody can have access to food. And so in the negative consequences of the pandemic, we've also seen that there are, well, that this has served our organizations to reposition themselves and to show the alternatives to the agro-industrial food model. And showing their resilience and their organization. So
and the importance, I guess, also to be organized. I mean, to have that organization and network already, so you can just really start.
So you have a lot of potential there, and they're doing it. They're feeding us right now. So
it's a lot of inspiration also. So we can move on to Gloria. We're talking, Afrikagruppen is also working together with the partner organizations in Southern Africa. And Rural Women Assembly is one of the partner organizations. And they have been highlighting also the similar challenges that Marlene just highlighted in Latin America, that it's hard for small-scale farmers to access markets or to sell their products on markets, because you close down the local markets and it's only the supermarkets that are open, and then I mean the local farmers, the small-scale farmers, can't access the supply chain for the emergency distribution, for instance. Can you elaborate a bit on that, and what can we do to change that?
Yeah, definitely. Similar as what you just explained, and what is faced from small-scale farmers in Latin America, I would say also reflects to what happens in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think it's more towards the push aside and the oppression and exploitation of small-scale farmers in general, especially in areas where they are highly dependent on their natural resources. But what the Rural Women Assembly, it's a movement in sub-Saharan Africa. They work in different countries within sub-Saharan Africa, and they have more than 200,000 members. And their movement is more to ensure food sovereignty, to ensure sustainability. And what they have reported on the ground is that because of this restriction of actually being in a large group, for example, there was no mechanism for small-scale farmers on how to continue selling their produce. So they were forced more to be inside, but at the same time, they saw that big companies, for example, supermarkets that could still operate. So you could see there already there wasn't an equal, there's already one side is given the opportunity, so there was no mechanism. So they highlighted that, and that is something that capitalism and commodification of food continues to do with land grabbing and etc. It's excluding especially the ones who are dependent on the natural resources. But in this process, there are some farmers within, for example, in Uganda and also in South Africa, who were still going back so that they could actually sell, because you want to get an income. But in the process, they were faced with a lot of police brutality because of trying to impose the curfew and the restriction. And there's a report in Uganda that for the small fisheries, who they couldn't continue with their daily providing for their livelihood, because then they couldn't go and fish, because you would do it at the evening, at night. So that is also something that they highlighted. And what was also said is that the small-scale farmers, if they are restricted, then they cannot feed their families. So it will just amplify towards more increase of people who are malnutrition and face hunger.
But can I just ask you, what was the reactions when they highlighted these challenges of, for instance, not being able to continue their work?
When they highlighted, like from rural women's perspective, even though when they highlighted to the government that they got a response more in terms of that there will be so many people in the market and supermarkets are more structured. But this is also the same case of how we view formal and informal sectors. And even the International Labour Organization highlighted that because of the corona crisis, there's about 1.6 billion workers who are working in informal sectors that are going to be in disadvantage. That either they don't have any income or the income is reduced. But what we also face is that because farmers are restricted to this local market, which is where you would buy local produce with different varieties, not just a very monogeneous kind of food system, it also leads to increase of prices. So for the ones that are open, increase the prices and it becomes not affordable for the whole community. So that is also a challenge towards that. But in this process, there wasn't actually a good mechanism on how to ensure that small-scale farmers could continue selling their produce with making sure that they adapt to the health conditions, just as the same way it's done for supermarkets. So they could have been a similar mechanism. They could also have been less brutality in the process of actually... but we see that small-scale farmers are the ones who are facing that, or small-scale producers in general. And also, there's been reports that in this process there's also have been riots because there's not enough food, especially in urban areas, and the food is in the rural areas, but then they can't transport it, so you have a lot of food loss in the process. And not waste. Waste is more that when you actually access it and choose to not use it. So there's a lot of loss of food. And also it affects, during this time when Corona is happening, it also affects the season when you're actually supposed to plant. You're supposed to harvest, because it's different in different regions in sub-Saharan Africa. In some places, they expect that it's a certain vegetable that they have to bring to the market, but they can no longer do that.
So it will give really long-term effects.
Yes, but at the same time, as you pointed out, there are strategies that the movement, like Rural Women Assembly, that are doing, that they are providing also kits, but in terms of seeds, that they say that it's now more than ever that we should be more sustainable in our food production. So just spreading more agroecology or sustainability, and also trying to push policies to change to support also small-scale farmers and not to provide safety net just to companies. Yes, that's just a little bit around Rural Women Assembly.
Thanks. I would just like to say to all of you who are watching now, if you have any questions, just write them in the comments and we will try our level best to answer. But if we just go back then to Sweden again and to Europe, can you talk a little bit about how Sweden is a part of this global food system and how Nordbruk is working with that. And you mentioned a bit before also that the effects of that we are so dependent on products being produced in other countries and so on. But can you elaborate a bit more about the situation on food sovereignty in Sweden?
Yeah, in the 1980s we had 100% food production, almost 100%, and because of this, the low food production in Sweden is mainly caused by the globalization and economic politics all over the world. And for us, we go back to the La Via Campesina definition of food sovereignty, that every country need to feed their own people with basic national food, and that is not the situation. In Sweden, we are not self-sufficient even on potatoes.
So what happened after the 80s? It's only like 30 years ago.
Yeah,
what happened?
We went members of the European Union.
Okay.
And the free trade thing is in that trade system in EU. So that's, and it's our chairman in Nordbruk has written this book.
Okay, yeah.
So
it's called Back to Basics: A Step Forward.
Yeah.
By Torgny Östling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in this book you can read about how the globalization has started and how and why we have this system today. The system in EU and WTO is described in the book, and I can read a quote from there.
Yeah, please do.
Free trade system in the EU and WTO contribute to create asymmetric effects inside the EU and globally. It is the interaction between those different political fields which determines the farmer's future. And I have an example. Product prices together with land issues and free trade rules on export and import on forest have effects on farming together with the CAPS system. The CAP system is the European agriculture policies. And and it's also very important that we have we are working for food sovereignty in Sweden. And it's possible if we go back to more small-scale farming in Sweden, because all the small-scale farmers are decreasing.
Do you know, like, the percentage, how many are small-scale farmers in Sweden and
no,
large
I don't
scale?
have it in my head now, but I think I don't remember.
But it's decreasing year by year.
Yeah, it is. And always there is less and less income for the produced, for example, milk or.
But you mentioned Finland. Do you have any other countries, or do you have any other countries in EU that are self-sufficient and have storage?
Yeah, Finland has, because they have another agreement with the European Union, so they can store food and they can produce more food.
Okay.
So they have a lot of production in the whole country, and they still have the old way of having a farm, because in Sweden we used to have farming in the summer and forestry, taking care of the forest in the winter. So our solution to get food sovereignty in Sweden is to get this old system back, that you have more combination farming. It is still there is a few that has this combination today also, but that means we need more of it, because otherwise we could not use all the land, because the big farming system doesn't suit the land we have. We have, it's more for small scale farming. So.
And I mean, for the viewers that we have now, do you, who maybe are not farmers themselves, but what do we need to do? I mean, if we're going to go back to how the system was in the past, what is need to be changed to be able to do that? You mentioned here that increase of the cost of land in Sweden is a big challenge, and also that you don't get paid for the job that you're doing, for instance, with the milk production, for instance, if you are a milk or dairy farmer.
Yeah, it's very hard to change in the system. We need to change the system as it is, and to protect, not to have trades with food going around the whole world. That is not possible to have more food here.
But the book, can you find it on your website, or where, if you want to have a copy?
Yeah, you can order it on the website, and we send it. It is in English, and we will have it in Sweden also.
Okay, great.
So, you can
it's a good tip, just if you want to learn more about the changes the last 30 years, and also some solutions.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. Yeah, so you were talking, Marlene, about human rights, and also that a lot of farmers and leaders of farmer unions have been killed recently, and that has been a big challenge, of course, also for the right to organize, that you can't highlight the challenges that are there. But could you reflect on the international initiatives that have been put forward, such as the UN Declaration for the Rights of the Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas? We know also that Sweden is one of few countries that haven't signed the declarations. Why haven't Sweden signed, and what are you as an organization doing about that, and what can we do?
Yeah, many questions. The declaration was actually a bottom-up initiative from La Via Campesina. La Via Campesina was on the forefront for this declaration, but it had also support from international allies like FIAN International, SETIM, and the government of Bolivia was really on the forefront there. The one at that time, then, when it was adopted. And it was adopted in 2018 in December by the General Assembly. And this is a big victory, because the small-scale farmers movement, together with other social movements, have been pushing for it and working with this declaration for 17 years. And it recognized the rights in the food production, but also it's a tool to protect them and to visibilize their discrimination and violence against them. And also that they own really small piece of land. Well, maybe to mention some things about the declaration, some central aspects, and it recognizes the right to land, but also sets new standards of individual and collective rights to land. It also talks about the rights to seeds and to be able to exchange and to save seeds, which is really important for the small scale agriculture, and also that seeds are being privatized. And it recognized the right to water in agriculture, to irrigation, and we're seeing also with the climate change and with the expansion also of the industrial agriculture, and that is getting less, it's getting scarce, as you say. And it also talks about the right to food again, but in the framework of food sovereignty, which means that access to food, but healthy food, and not whichever food. It also mentions agroecology, which is important, and some other things that they talk about also rural women's rights and their access to food. Their access to land and territories and so on. And Sweden voted no because they had different arguments, but they say that we already have a legal human rights framework that is sufficient according to them. But also they're skeptical about the new collective rights that are recognized in the declaration, and they claim also that it contradicts already existing human rights framework. And but we have to have in mind also that Sweden hasn't recognized the International Convention of Indigenous People of ILO 162, so that could be also a reason why they said no. And what we believe is also behind Sweden's position is that the declaration is really far-reaching in the rights that it gives. So access to land, access to seed, mentions food sovereignty, agroecology, which are now being commodities. And land is treated like a commodity, and natural resources also. And the whole food system is based on that. So we believe that there are economic interests also behind their stance. And we hope that Sweden is going to change their position, of course, because this is a really important tool for small-scale farmers to claim their rights, but also to have public policies that address the demands that they have for a sustainable world and for humanity.
And this is something also that Makten över maten and raised in the debate article.
Yes,
so you're
exactly.
doing an advocacy work.
Yes, continuously. We have to see what more we do.
Yes. Yeah.
To pressure.
Right. Now actually we have our first question here from the audience. It's from Oscar, who's wondering, what do you think Swedish citizens can do to help improve the current situation and problems? Would you like to give some comments on that? Yeah.
I think you should get more knowledge by reading, for example, this book, and also to support local farmers and to ask them, how is it? Because it's many things that a farmer is, I think this the peasants' rights is also should be in Sweden.
Yeah.
So it's not, they need support.
So go to local markets and buy their products.
Yeah.
Visit farms and buy directly from the farms.
Yeah. And try to support, all of us here. So the organizations, so we can work and get forward with the question and the discussion. Because the media is not taking our debate articles. It's a small thing that people get to know about everything. So
more knowledge and then support by buying products.
And supporting
the organizations. Great. We're also going to share some the links on the comments how to support the 3 organizations. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, definitely. I think what on an individual level that Sweden can do is also to push our decision makers, so more in the politicians, and to just push for policies that actually contribute towards a sustainability and also support small-scale farmers. So, and this can be done in different levels because you have different laws passing from the region level to the national level. So it's more to keep in mind and follow up, and then once you identify an issue that is not in support of sustainability, it's to also individually take a stand on that. I think that is really important, and the pandemic has also shown that with not being able to move, but people could also do something from home.
Yeah.
And I think that also just being aware of how food is produced and how much resources is taken in producing food, and who is producing that food. Is it contributing towards a more sustainability, or is it contributing to more oppression of other people in other countries? So this would be more for in terms of large-scale farming, because large-scale farming is done in countries within sub-Saharan Africa and countries in Latin America, and it takes up the land that our small-scale farmers depend on, and it's more pushing them towards an unfertile land. So it's also being aware of that and following up on that in the individual level, I would say. And the rest, of course, join in.
That's great advice also. And as you say, it's politicians on all levels. It can be your local politicians, but also the EU parliamentarians.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And also another thing is that in Sweden we exploit farming land, and that is very horrible, because soon we will not be able to have food because we build things on it. So it's very important that we take care of the farming land, because it's formed through hundreds of years, and it's so hard to get more land. So especially in this city areas. So try your best, Oscar.
Great. Thanks, a lot of good tips. We also got a question here from Jurga, who's asking the name of the book. So maybe we can. It's called Back to Basics: A Step Forward, and you can find it on Nordbruk's webpage. And buy it from there online. And then we have another question: how can individuals contribute to improve the situation? We talked a little bit about it, but maybe, I mean, you said you can become a member of the 3 organizations. You can also donate money, and I think you can find more information on your websites. But how can individuals contribute in other ways?
I can say that, as I think you already has said, to get more engaged and get more knowledge about these issues. And we have also activist groups in the work that are members in our organizations. And they organize these kind of seminars and also are out in school talking about these issues, highlighting the vulnerability of small-scale farmers, but also the murders of social leaders. So get engaged, that's what I would say. And also to support, get more information about, for example, the Swedish pension funds, and put pressure on politicians, but maybe through us, so they don't invest in farmland in Brazil, for example, that leads to human rights violations and environmental degradation, but also at international level, the free trade agreements that are signed, I think get to raise more awareness about.
The access to land is very important for farmers, and also for reindeer care, the Sami people. And I haven't been talking about it, but in this book it's also about the voluntary guidelines for for land access and water. So it should be implemented in Sweden, I think, because it's a very good thing, and you get something to.
I guess we're all getting excited.
Would you like to start?
I like after Gloria.
Okay, Gloria.
I would like to, on the part of what an individual level can do, I think it's also really important to first change our mindset and rethink on how we view small-scale farmers, because most of the time it's reflective in the articles and research that small-scale farmers are the vulnerable group, that they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So whatever ideas they have, let's not listen. But the IPCC report talked about agroecology, and small-scale farmers have been practicing agroecology for as long as they've been farming. So it shows that even the traditional knowledge and ground root knowledge, whether it's producing food or taking care of animals, should be also respected and listened, and it should be reflective in the policy. So I think we have to rethink on how we see our food production and who actually feeds us in general. And with that, we have to be aware that there's inequality in the food system, and there is economic gains from multinational corporations that tend to also, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, push towards the GMOs. And I think whatever kind of technology or knowledge shouldn't be imposed or pushed, but it should be more you should look at the context as well, and what that specific place does. So that is really important to look at. And then also because of these because of already the power and the control of the food system, because currently there's 3 companies that control about more than 63% of the seeds that is supplied in the market. So that shows already that policy will be reflected towards making sure that business continues, and that might not be the best sustainability for in a long term. So we have to really rethink on how, for climate change, for our own survival, and also for the importance of small-scale farmers. And that is also through signing petitions that different organizations, different movement try to get their voices on the table.
Definitely. Yeah. And just to add on what you said, I mean, if we look back 100 years, we have lost the majority of the seeds in the world, and I don't think people are really aware of it, how this affects like also the biodiversity in the world.
Definitely.
Marianne, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, well, just something very practical actually. It's that work for public policies or pressure your local politicians and decision makers so they can implement politics that benefit and promote small-scale farmers and their produce and their commercialization, but also to buy, like for example, the products to schools and institutions. That would be a good start, and that's, for example, what the landless workers, landless movement in Brazil has arrived with their different governments at local level. So one thing is that's what I wanted to mention most of all. But I agree with we have to really rethink our whole food production, food system, and question also where does this come from. It's been traveling. The food that we eat here, we have in our supermarkets that we can choose from all over the world. They have been traveling for a really long time, and there are big transportation pollution because of the transportation, and also the food system that we have now that is globalized uses a lot of fossil fuel. You have dates that 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from the industrial agriculture. So to support small-scale farmers would be really better for the climate also.
And that's even written in the IPCC report.
Exactly.
So we have the facts, and also we can see now from what we have talked about today that it's affecting people all around the world, and that the global system is something that, I mean, now in the effects of Corona, that we can see also it's really giving a lot of bad effects on the small-scale farmer situations, and also that we are very vulnerable here in Sweden and farmers all around the world. We have a last question from the audience. It's from Francesca, who's wondering, is there a list of local producers in the area in order to be able to reach them and buy directly from them? So Eva, I think it's a question to you.
I don't don't know so many farmers here. I'm from the north of Sweden.
Okay. But it could be someone from, it's not only from Stockholm viewing, it could be people from all over.
Yeah, Rekoringen is something, and you just go through your areas.
Yeah.
I think it's also, maybe we can put down the link of the debate article written by small farmers in Sweden, where they debated on how it's important to support small-scale farmers within Sweden. And I think in that there is different lists of different local producers that could be very helpful.
And I mean, it's a good idea. Maybe we can look into that to try to see, like, compile a list of local producers, local markets, because there are local markets all around Sweden also. But sometimes they're hard to find.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. We only have like a few minutes left, and just to summarize, do you have like anything else you would like to say on how we can change the system? Because it's evidence, as we already mentioned, that it's giving a lot of effects. And you talked about some of the solutions and some initiatives that have been taken. Maybe we can end with that, if we have any like other initiatives or any other solutions you've been thinking about, you've been hearing from your partner organizations on the way forward, because we don't know. Corona is still here, and it's gonna give effects for a long time. Do you have anything you would like to say?
The solution is food sovereignty.
Food sovereignty.
Yeah. And agroecology. So
and just to add on that, it should also be reflective in the EU policies when it comes to the trade agreements, when it comes to the strategy, like example, between EU and Africa strategy, which is in negotiation now, and also the new biodiversity 2020 strategy. Yeah. So agroecology and food sovereignty should reflect in all these policies to actually be able to have a sustainability and
And EU is dumping the prices for when they sell to other countries.
Yes,
so that's very hard.
It's taken out like small scale farms are like getting less and less because of this politics. Well, I will agree on the same thing. I would just like to maybe talk a bit more about food sovereignty. What does it mean? It means that you prioritize like and as you said, also national and local consumption and production, but it also talks about the access to land for small-scale farmers so they can produce food, and agroecology in its technical aspect. It talks about protecting biodiversity, environment, the soil and so on, but also it's actually the tool for small-scale farmers to resist the resistance against the capitalist model. So it's really important that we have that, but we're seeing also internationally that you have free trade agreements like the one that was ratified last year. No, what hasn't been ratified but was signed between Mercosur and the European Union. And in the Mercosur countries includes Brazil. There are 4 countries: Paraguay, Argentina, and Uruguay. And this we're seeing how there is deforestation in Brazil, and how human rights and indigenous rights especially are getting violated. And also the government there has opened up or wants to open up with this law proposal that they have done, indigenous territories for industrial agriculture. So I think it's really good that also people like stand against this and position themselves that this is not sustainable, so we have to do something.
We need to act, and I think that could be like the end of just trying to tell the viewers here that there's a lot of things that you can do. We have mentioned a few of the things, ideas, but also if you want to learn more, please visit our websites. I know that all the organizations have different campaigns highlighting, trying to put pressure on decision makers and politicians. And if you want to learn more, there's a lot of reports also, and there are local groups all around in Sweden if you want to get involved and engaged, or join as a member, or just support with a small donation, so you can continue with your important work, and also support and work together with organizations in Southern Africa, Europe and Latin America. Thank you so much for joining today, and thank you to everyone who was listening. And if you have any more questions, please just write to us on Facebook, and we will try to respond there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.